As Paul said, I'm going to take a section out of this book, The Compass of Zen. We've been in the midst of a weekly discussion. People who are giving Dharma Talks are taking a section out of this book. In our tradition, we don't do a lot of study. We don't study the sutras that much. We don't study the ancient teachings of the Chinese Zen masters or even the words of the Buddha. We spend most of our time working with the great question, what am I? And we do that in a Buddhist context, and we use Buddhism, and we have the trappings of Buddhism, and we are Buddhist, I suppose, although some might question that. What is a Buddhist, actually? But as I said, we don't do a lot of study. We don't rely so much on the words of the past to direct us. We rely on our experience and our great question to find our way. When I was introducing the chanting tonight, in some ways I gave my whole Dharma talk. I wanted a little commentary here, and I don't remember exactly how I put it even. But when I was talking about chanting, I said, we don't chant to understand something. We don't chant to learn something. We chant to experience the moment. And for those of us who are new here tonight, I said you may find yourself having some reaction to the chanting. Right there, it's practice. Right there, we get to see our minds. And for those of us who have been chanting for many years, for myself, I've been doing these same chants, and we're getting close to 35 years doing these same chants, the same 4 chants. It's really about 6 chants that we generally do. And once in a while we'll throw in 1 or 2 others, but they're the same chants. And it's hard for me to remember from so many years ago, but the way I talk about it is it took me about 8 years to find my way into chanting, where I even understood why we would call chanting practice. For me, the meditation practice is the heart, and always was the heart of my formal practice. And I do chanting because we do chanting. And even now, I'm the teacher here at the Zen Center, but because we're part of an international group of a school of Zen, it's not my choice what we do in terms of the form. This is what we do. Years and years ago, I lived for a short time in this little Zen community up in the Redwood Forest, about 6 miles in from the town of Mendocino. And there was a guy who was leading the place. He wasn't officially a teacher anywhere, but looking back now, he probably had 5 or 6 more years practice than I did, but at the time that seemed like a lifetime. He was about 20 years older than I was, and I felt good practicing with him. But one of the things that was very frustrating in that short time that I was there is that he was experimenting with things. So he would change the practice. And I was just one of the people living there and practicing there, and I didn't have a voice. And it was quite frustrating that we would do things one way for a while, and then he'd say, okay, now we're going to do it some other way. And then we'd do it that way for a little while. And he says, well, now we're going to do it some other way. And being part of this school, what I came to appreciate when I first started out and practicing was that the form was set. It really wasn't anybody's idea anymore. We had a particular form. That was the form we used. And it wasn't about opinion. It wasn't about likes and dislikes. So the form, in that sense, becomes a mirror, a way of seeing ourselves. On one hand, very simply, it's a mindfulness exercise. We keep our hands like this. We don't keep them like this. Now, really, I don't think there's any difference between keeping your hands like this or keeping your hands like this. But this is the form. So then, each time our hands go in this position, that's the form. And it becomes a mindfulness exercise. How do I keep my mind when I'm doing that? In some ways, this would be just as good. Actually, you might see there'd be a little problem with this. First of all, it'd be hard to hold the chant book if you still had to do it. But we'd figure out a way to deal with that. But no, we do it like this. So that it's nobody's idea and nobody's opinion. It's just the way we do it. That in itself is quite a powerful teaching. Now, in the old days in Asia, when people were practicing Buddhism, you didn't really have a lot of choice. Whatever country you found yourself in, wherever you were born and were growing up, the forms of Buddhism were essentially set. Now, it's true there probably were a few different schools that you could go to, but by and large the form was the form. Here in the United States now, in the current era, we have a lot of choice. Not only in the United States, really all over the West. Because teachings from all the different Buddhist traditions have come to this country. So now you get to choose. If you think these gray robes are kind of stupid, you could go someplace where they don't have robes. And the Vipassana world is quite big in the Bay Area and in the United States. And we say, well, they don't wear robes. They haven't taken on the Asian trappings the way we have. But if you go to, I'm saying this, somebody might argue with me, I have to be fair. But what I have noticed in the past, the times that I've been to a Vipassana community, there is a kind of culture that gets set up. In the old days, we used to laugh, yeah, we wear gray robes, and in the Vipassana world, you wore a shawl. And everybody would wear a shawl. But that's not, they don't wear robes, they wear shawls. But there's really no difference between a robe and a shawl. It's just convention. But there's a big difference in our minds. Oh, I like shawls. It's really nice to wear a shawl. And these gray robes I don't like so much. Well, that's okay if that's how you feel about it. You can always go practice there. But it's important to notice it's mind that makes that. One person's wonderful robe is another person's terrible robe. The robe itself is neutral. It's just how we keep our minds. There's a very important sutra in Northern Asian teaching called the Widen Sutra, or the the Avatamsaka Sutra. And this is a very long sutra, and honestly, I've never read it. I mean, apparently it goes on and on and on, and the language is quite arcane. I have the benefit of my teacher's experience, and he reduced that sutra to one main point. And that point basically says, if you want to understand the ways of the Buddhas of the past, present, and future, you must understand that everything is created by mind alone. This is a very important teaching. Mind makes our reality. If you grow up in one culture, there are particular cultural norms. If you grow up in another culture, you find other cultural norms. The good or bad of it is made by our thinking. It's made by our opinion. Our opinion is important. I'm not trying to denigrate our opinions, but it's not truth. It's just the way we view things. So Zen turns towards looking into, how do I keep my mind? What view do I have about things? And I talked a couple of weeks ago about each one of us having our own perspective and our own view, and believing that that view is the right view. Or sometimes we don't believe in ourselves very much, so we think, if it's my view, it must be the wrong view. But there's still this attachment to perspective. This teaching that everything is created by mind alone teaches us to look deeply into that perspective, to question it, to wonder about it, to be curious, rather than hold on to my opinion, rather than hold on to my idea, to notice my opinion, notice my idea, and challenge it. How do you know that? Is it really true? So, I picked a particular section that was quite easy to talk about, but you'll see. The section is called Effort in Zen. And all of these chapters have a short, it's written in English and in Chinese, and it comes either from the sutras or some old poems or stories. So this is Effort in Zen. When walking, standing, sitting, lying down, speaking, being silent, moving, being still. Pretty much includes everything. If you want to add a few things to that, go ahead. Playing baseball, chanting, doing your work, being with your family or your friends, eating, sleeping, walking, hiking. We could make a list that's quite long, but it all fits there. So when walking, standing, sitting, lying down, speaking, being silent, moving, being still, at all times and in all places. So whatever you're doing, wherever you are, whenever it is. Okay, that's the setup. It doesn't leave anything out. Without interruption. What is this? One moment is infinite kalpas. And a kalpa is a really, 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 really long time. One illustration of a kalpa I once saw is that you take a boulder about a mile deep, and then you have a drip of water, drip, 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 drip. And a kalpa is the time it takes for that drip of water to work its way through the rock so that it goes out the other end. That's a long time. Another time I saw something about a kalpa is the length of a time that a universe lasts. So it's a long time, infinite time. One moment is infinite kalpas. One moment is the entire universe. Just as one thing is the entire universe. Whatever you're doing, wherever you are, whenever it is, without interruption, ask the question, what is this? That's effort in Zen. That's it. So we do formal practice, and then we have all the rest of our lives. Formal practice helps us really work with the question. The rest of our lives give us an opportunity to meet all the varying situations and conditions that we find ourselves in with this same question. What is this? Sometimes what is this is talked about as what am I? Really, there's not a lot of difference in Buddhism between I and this. We make a distinction in our minds. I'm over here, this is over there. But that's my perspective. So for me, all of you and this room that we're sitting in is part of this. I'm here, this is here. Sometimes I say, I'm here, you're there. But for each one of you, each individually, you're the I, and everything else is the this. So you go up higher in an airplane, and it's all this. But if you're flying in the airplane, I'm looking down at this. But that's the distinction we make. This whole universe is one thing. Just as one moment is infinite kalpa, one thing is infinite things. Very famous saying in Zen Buddhism is the one is the many is the one. The one makes up the many. The many are the faces of the one. But we don't know that. We can't see that. Our conventional view of the world is stuck in I and you, this and that, right and wrong, good and bad. All of those things come from mind. So what is mind? We can hear this, and maybe some of us have a nice phrase that we use that helps us understand that. And that may be very helpful. But I know my own experience is that phrase also becomes a hindrance, because that view is still only a partial view. Our individual mind is too small to really understand. There's a line in our, what we call the temple rules, and it says, if you can break the walls of yourself, you're already infinite in time and space. So mind, my narrow self, separates the world. Break through those barriers, and it's one with infinite time and infinite space. But this talk is about effort. So I want to just briefly talk about the two different kinds of effort that I brought up. And I do this in part because this is our first week out from our 8-day retreat, which we did all of last week. We ended on Saturday morning at about, by the time we finished our talk, about 10 o'clock. And there's a very particular kind of effort that one who's practicing Zen has to put in when you do an 8-day retreat. Any kind of meditation is an effort. But a longer retreat, and in our tradition, an 8-day retreat, we think of as a long retreat, but at this moment in Providence, Rhode Island, and also in Warsaw, Poland, there's a 90-day meditation retreat going on. And in the olden days, at the time of the Buddha, and it actually is still carried out in many places around the world, the tradition is you alternate 90 days of what in Korean practice we call kyolche, which literally means tight Dharma, with 90 days of heije, which is called loose Dharma. So you alternate back and forth. In our schedule here at Empty Gate Zen Center, just about every month we have either a 1-day or a 3-day meditation retreat, and then once a year we do this week-long 8-day retreat. And the reason that we do that is practice, we need to have both tight and loose. We need both the intensive practice of sitting here for 8 days, and we also need the practice of going home, going back into the world, back into our work, back into our lives, and using our practice with this same great question, what am I, to actually experience moment to moment, what is it? Not my idea of it, but what is it? So, there's a few of us in this room, 4 or 5 of us perhaps, who sat most of the 8 days last week. And probably if you spoke to any one of us, you'd get a different piece of what an 8-day retreat is like. So just briefly for me, one of the things that I took out of the retreat, now I'm the teacher here, so I had a lot to do during this retreat because I set it up that I teach part of the time, but I'm also doing my own retreat for the whole thing. But many of the days I'm just following the schedule basically like everybody else is. And one of the things that I noticed for myself is, in comparison to the retreat, I've been noticing lately how there are things that start happening in my life that kind of grab me. And I watch my reactivity to those things. And in that reactivity, I can see ways that I get lost. And a large part of practice for me is in daily life is catching that, not falling into judgment or criticism of myself, although, believe me, that's possible for me to do. But that's just noise. The importance in practice is to catch it and return home, return back to the base point. We would say to our center. Maybe another way of saying it is to catch the reactivity and the getting lost in mind and return to clarity. Return to 0 point. If 0 is the base, reactivity could be anywhere from 1 to an infinite number. But whatever it is, the return is often an immediate, boom, just come back. The first point is catching the reactivity. Because often we're so lost in our feeling mind and our thought mind, we don't even know what's going on. So first it takes catch yourself. And second is return to your center. And a lot of what we do on retreat is cultivate our center. To get familiar with that base point. So we know where home base actually is, and we know how to come back. But on the retreat, what I noticed for myself was a real diminishment of the reactivity. The things would come up that in my everyday life, I might really, colloquially we might say, I might trip out about. And this time, it was less, there was a lot less reactivity. And I had some very difficult situations come up. My outside life invaded the retreat right at the beginning. I had a crisis that I had to deal with right from the start. It had nothing to do with the retreat. Caught me, in a way, very off guard. But as it was going on, I just took care of it, step by step. And I didn't get so extremely tossed around by it that I might have outside retreat. So this effort in Zen, when it comes in a formal setting, is to really bear down, really work with this center. And if you're working with your breath and your center, to really stay with it. Whether you were in the Dharma room or we're on break. Whether we're eating or chanting or sitting or resting. To stay with the center, to stay with the breath. And though oftentimes for me at the very beginning of a meditation retreat, there's some voices saying, oh no, why am I doing this? It's hard. It's not necessary. Some of us have a pleasant experience, but most of us don't. But that's effort. In some ways, effort really means applying ourselves whether we like it or not. It's great when you like it. That's the easy time. But how do you meet the moment when you don't want to meet the moment? When you're sleepy and you have to sit upright on your cushion. Or you don't like the soup that's being served. Or your I, my, me mind gets very strong. And still, you have to be present. So retreat practice is like taking the corral and minimizing it maybe by 90%. So those walls that we bump up against, which are usually so far outside that often we don't even notice the walls, on retreat, we're hemmed in. And we bounce up against those walls quite a lot. And it may not be a pleasant experience, but the effort in Zen is always and everywhere, what am I? What is this? So even though retreat practice can be difficult, in some ways it's easy, because we know that our job is to stay with the question. Where in our everyday life, it might seem a lot easier because the walls are farther out. We get to choose what time we go to sleep and what time we wake up. We get to order off of a big menu what it is we want to eat. There's a lot more choice and a lot more freedom. But in that choice and freedom, it's often quite difficult to keep the question, to stay with our center, to remember our practice. So effort in our everyday life is in some ways more difficult and maybe even more important, because we have to pay attention. When the walls, the smells in this building remind us to pay attention, but the walls and the smells in our everyday life bring us more close to our desire and our greed and our anger and our neediness. But the practice is the same. It may look very different, but the practice is the same. What is this? Always and everywhere, no matter what. And that's what we all, to be a practitioner of Zen, in any kind of meditative style of Buddhism, that's the thing we have to learn. It's always and everywhere. How do we keep our minds? That's our practice. That's what we're cultivating. And I guess the last point I want to make about this is that the formal practice is critical to cultivate that awareness, to cultivate that habit of mind. Otherwise, the habits of mind of desire, anger, and ignorance, which Buddha called the three poisons, those are the things that dominate our perspective. The beautiful thing to me about Buddhism, that it's not about dogma. It's not about somebody telling you what's right and wrong and you following that. And we have precepts, there are Buddhist spiritual values that are actually quite important. But the Buddha said, be a lamp unto yourself. Don't just do it because I tell you so. Find out from your own experience, in your own particular life, in your own particular way. And the practice we have at the Zen Center is to support that. Each one of us has our own way. When we come to the Zen Center, we follow the way of the Zen Center. Again, you do formal practice, the corral is narrower. But you walk out that door, and suddenly it's your own corral again. We narrow the corral to learn to find the question, to learn to experience that center, to find ways, and to have the experience of doing that in a concentrated way. We do have insight. We do recognize important things of our own experience. And when we talk, we have what we call a circle talk at the end of the retreat. Everybody who spoke talked about their own particular insights, their own particular experiences. And I'll speak for myself, it was quite moving to hear each one of us, and there were about 20 of us at the end, each one of us expressing how it is in that particular corner of the universe. Each one of us lives in our own universe. And by listening to each other, we find out more about the contours and the possibilities in this world that we live. So remember, the Buddha taught, mind makes everything. If you have no mind, then what? That's the Zen question. That's the Zen way. Question? Comment? Anything at all that anybody wants me to talk about?
Thank you for your talk. My question is slightly unrelated to what you were just talking about, but it's a big question on my mind. Buddhism teaches about ending of suffering. In America, we're speaking about pursuit of happiness. Is pursuit of happiness and ending of suffering the same or different?
You already understand. And you're supposed to say, so I ask you. Your question was quite a good question, but it was a sharp Dharma question, so be careful. You make happiness, you get happiness. You make suffering, you get suffering. You choose. If you think you understand happiness, you'll never find it. If you let go of everything, what is there to make you unhappy? And who is it? Who is there to be happy? So if you attach to happiness in opposition to suffering, then you've lost your way. Sometimes we suffer, sometimes we have joy. That's human life. I think what you're pointing to is equanimity, acceptance. To be able to be in whatever the moment is and appreciate it for what it is. If it's a difficult moment, appreciate the difficulty. If it's a joyful, pleasant moment, appreciate the joyful pleasantness of it. Don't get stuck. Don't get trapped in your own preference.
Okay.
Anybody else?
You just said, if you let go of everything. I think maybe you want to... That sounds stark.
Let go of your attachment
Okay.
to everything.
All right. Not let go of everything, you're just your attachment.
And then be with everything. Whatever it is that's happening right now, that is your world.
I was just thinking in terms of depression, where that's this total flattening, completely letting go.
Yeah.
Well, that's not what you mean.
No. Depression is a mind state. Depression is how you relate to the moment. And usually if you're stuck in what we call depression, you're kind of blank, blah. I mean, sometimes it can be quite intensely painful too.
Yeah.
But I think what you're talking about is a kind of flatness.
Mm-hmm.
That's a particular view.
Flattening sounds, letting go sounds like the flattening.
Yeah, no, letting go is like taste it, feel it, experience it. There's no separation between you and it. It's completely alive. It's not flat. Okay. Anybody else?
So if you make happiness,
If you make happiness?
you make happiness.
Yeah.
And if you make happiness, you make suffering.
Yeah. So we say don't make anything. When you're happy, be happy. When you're struggling, you're changing the word. Because suffering is a secondary experience. Usually we suffer because we don't like what's going on. So I would just say, if you can return to what's going on, whether you like it or not, then the suffering disappears. It still might suck, even though suck is our own perspective. But if somebody is pummeling you with an iron bar, few people might enjoy that. But by and large, that's a pretty lousy experience. Or if you're losing your home, or if there's the death of someone you hold close to you, or your child is sick, these are horrible situations. But often the suffering takes us farther away, and we lose our ability to really connect to what's happening. So really all I'm suggesting is to come back to the moment. Suffering often takes us away, and by not picking and choosing, we can come back and deal with what is. A lot of times we don't get to choose. You know, sometimes we jokingly say it's a first world problem. It's a problem of privilege to be able to choose our problems. But most of the world doesn't have that kind of privilege. And sometimes you just have to deal. But I think even for all of us, the privilege disappears at some point because things happen that we don't expect. We lose something we want or we love. And to just be there and not get lost in the dream of suffering. So it's all about making something. Yeah.
Make is the problem.
Making is the problem.
So I've been noticing, and I've noticed this for a while, but I don't seem to get stuff until it happens to me. And like one example would be, I don't notice a certain kind of car until I buy that car. And then after I buy that car, it seems like everybody has that car. And so that's interesting that my mind is that way. And then, so, you know, lately, so, you know, my dad has cancer and he's not doing so good. And it appears that all of a sudden I notice that almost everybody has cancer. I can't believe how many people I now know that they have someone in their family that has cancer.
Right.
Everybody has someone in their family that has cancer, like almost everybody. Mm-hmm. But before, I never noticed that. Mm-hmm. This is my own little world, right. Not paying attention to that. So, and I'm also starting to notice that everybody is dying.
Well, everybody is dying.
Yeah, but I don't notice it.
Right.
You know, now I'm noticing that everybody's dying.
Yeah.
And they're dying all over the place.
Yeah. Yeah. Dropping like flies, huh?
So what is with that of being so unaware unless it happens to you?
It's being stuck in your own view. My reality is reality. And the world is really poking at that all the time, but we don't see it. But that effort and practice, I mean, you're seeing this in part because you practice. Now your job is to bring your practice to the moment so you widen your view. So you're not stuck in this narrow tunnel vision. Because the tunnel is created by your perspective. So how do you widen your perspective so that you can have what we call compassion, to be able to witness other people's pain without having to experience it yourself? I mean, I have I suppose in this case, I can almost say the good fortune as a psychotherapist and a Zen teacher. I'm dealing with people all the time. And people are coming to me with problems that I don't have. But there's never been a client or a person in the Zen Center that I've worked with that I can't really relate to what they're going through. It may not be my exact experience, but I've got something pretty close, or I know somebody close to me who's had it. So, again, the face is different. But the humanity is not so different. And we have to train to open our hearts and open our minds to be able to see. So now you're at an important point. You're recognizing it. Now work with it so you widen your view. So it doesn't take the iron bar of your father getting cancer for you to recognize the cancer that's all around. That's a little harsh because it's not like you don't recognize it at all, of course. It's starkly stated. But that's our practice. What is this? To be able to really witness the world as it exists, not our fantasy of it. That's effort. And one of the things I wanted to say, another word for effort in Zen is courage. To have the courage to face the moment. That takes effort, but it takes courage. To go to the places that are difficult. To face things that we don't want to see and don't want to deal with. That takes courage. Courage and effort are mirrors of each other. Any last question before we end? Anything else?